I want you to just imagine something for a second. Think about the last time you were truly deeply angry.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. Or maybe just think about like a chronic cynicism you might carry around, just that low-grade frustration with the world.
Yeah, that simmering baseline of annoyance.
Exactly. Well, what if holding on to that feeling isn't just, a bad mood? What if it is, quite literally, a physical self-destruct sequence that is actively melting the structural scaffolding of your brain?
I mean, it completely upends how we view our internal lives.
Mm.
We're so used to treating emotions as these abstract, almost ghostly things.
Right, like they're just thoughts floating in the ether.
Yeah, floating around in the realm of psychology or philosophy.
Mm.
But the physical reality occurring inside your skull is a completely different story.
And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We're exploring a truly groundbreaking paper called The Thermodynamics of Affect. And honestly, this source material is a total paradigm shift.
It really is.
It takes human emotion out of that abstract bucket and anchors it firmly into the realm of hard physics, like literal thermodynamics.
Which, if you think about it, is really the only logical way to look at it when you consider what the human brain actually is.
A machine.
Basically, yeah. It is
Yeah.
the most sophisticated thermodynamic engine we know of in the universe.
Yeah.
It constantly have to balance this massive influx of information with a very strict, finite budget of metabolic energy. So it's an engine completely governed by the laws of
You
physics.
say I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around that, though, because an engine implies fuel, heat, physical mechanics.
Right.
But a feeling like frustration about a work email that feels invisible. How did we even end up with a brain that processes an invisible, abstract social emotion using heavy-duty physical thermodynamics? Like, what was the original design spec for this engine?
Well, to understand the design, you really have to look at the environment it was built to survive in.
Yep.
Let's look back at our evolutionary ancestors. In a pure survival situation, the brain simply did not have the metabolic energy or the time really to process the infinite complexity of its surroundings.
Because it's too much data.
Way too much data. So the limbic system, which is the brain's emotional center, it evolved to use a mechanism that computer scientists actually call lossy data compression.
Oh, okay, let's unpack this for a second.
Yeah, go for it.
If we're talking about data compression, is this like taking a massive, super high resolution, raw image file and just crushing it down into a tiny, heavily pixelated JPEG?
That's exactly it.
Because, you lose all the beautiful detail, but the file loads in a fraction of a second.
That is a perfect way to visualize it.
Yeah,
In the ancestral wild, nuance will get you killed.
right.
If you hear a rustle in the tall grass,
Yeah.
you do not want your brain sitting there analyzing the wind velocity or, the specific species of the vegetation.
That requires too much computational energy.
Exactly. It takes too long and burns too many calories. Instead, your brain just discards all that complex sensory data and compresses it into one crude high-speed signal.
Which is just fear, run.
Yes, fear equals run.
The pixelated JPEG tells you to sprint, and you survive.
And it was incredibly efficient for that specific environment. It minimized the time and the caloric energy required to literally stay alive. The problem is, well, the environment changed, but the engine didn't.
Ah, so we're stuck with ancient hardware.
Right. Modern stressors for you and me are almost never predators hiding in the bushes. They are abstract. It's a looming mortgage payment.
Or a passive-aggressive comment from a boss.
For a relentless news cycle. Yeah.
And we can't exactly physically run away from a mortgage payment.
No, we just sit there at our desks. But the brain is still flooding the system with that compressed, pixelated survival signal.
Oh, wow.
We are revving the engine without any physical release. And this leads to what the paper calls the energetic model of allostatic load, or EMAL for short. Chronic stress literally creates an allostatic debt.
Wait, meaning we are quite literally going into a physiological energy deficit.
Yes, exactly. Supporting a constant low-grade state of alarm requires an immense amount of metabolic energy.
Because the engine is always redlining.
Right. And your body has to pull those resources from somewhere. So it starts stealing energy away from the body's natural systems for growth, cellular maintenance, immune repair.
Just to fund the panic?
You're funding a panic response by bankrupting your body's upkeep.
Man, if we are going into physiological debt like that, how do we actually measure it? Like, how do you calculate the mathematical cost of a bad mood? Because I have to say, looking at the physics of human consciousness in these sources was intense.
It's heavy stuff, for sure. The paper uses something called the entropic brain hypothesis. It relies on Shannon entropy.
Okay, Shannon entropy, which is from information theory, right?
Yes. In simple terms, entropy is a mathematical measure of uncertainty or disorder or basically noise in a system.
Okay, noise.
Right. And Carl Friston, who is a very prominent neuroscientist, applied this to biology with his free energy principle. He proposed that biological systems are always trying to minimize surprisal.
Because constantly being surprised by your environment would be exhausting.
Completely exhausting. The brain desperately wants predictability so it doesn't have to burn precious calories constantly figuring out what's happening.
That makes total sense.
And that's the core of it. The paper actually maps this out on a fascinating graph called the entropic spectrum of consciousness.
I remember looking at that graph.
Yeah, if you look at the bottom left, where neural chaos and entropy are at their absolute lowest, you find anesthesia.
Like being totally knocked out.
Right. The brain is highly ordered, highly predictable, and basically offline. Then, moving up to the middle of the graph, you find normal waking consciousness.
But then way up in the top right corner of this graph, where neural activity is just completely chaotic, disorganized, and high entropy, that's where they place hostility and rage.
Exactly. High-entropy emotional states are essentially the brain being overwhelmed by disorganized signaling. It's a state of maximum internal friction.
Okay, wait. I really want to push back on this idea for a second, or at least challenge it.
Sure.
Is my bad mood literally a thermodynamic reaction? I mean, when we talk about friction and heat, are we speaking metaphorically here, or are negative emotions actually functioning like a physical machine that's running wildly inefficiently and burning up?
What's fascinating here is that the neurophysics research treats it as a literal thermodynamic cycle, not a metaphor.
Seriously.
Seriously. The paper categorizes negative, fear, anger, chronic cynicism as an exothermic Carnot cycle.
Okay, exothermic, meaning it is actively releasing or losing heat.
Yes. It is burning massive amounts of energy and dissipating it as thermal waste. Think about what rumination actually is.
Replaying an argument in the shower.
Exactly. You are obsessing over a past grievance, running the exact same mental algorithm over and over without generating any new solutions.
You're just spinning your tires.
You're continuously accumulating information about the past, and biologically that burns physical fuel. Conversely, positive affect things like benevolence, joy, deep social connection that functions as an endothermic reversed Carnot cycle.
Wait, endothermic, so that means it absorbs and stores energy.
A benevolent state is biologically geared to store energy. It builds what we call synaptic complexity. Instead of burning fuel to dwell on the past, the brain is calmly investing its energy into building a more resilient, complex neural network to handle the future.
So hostility is just terrible fuel economy.
Terrible.
But here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly, a little terrifying.
Oh.
If hostility runs the brain's engine hot, what happens to the physical hardware when it overheats for months or years on end?
Well, the hardware degrades. The paper outlines a highly specific biological cascade called biological disassembly.
See, I want us to walk the listener through that domino effect, because reading the steps of this biological disassembly in the sources felt like reading a horror story.
It's sobering, that's for sure.
I really want to make sure we understand the mechanisms. Why exactly does a bad mood melt the brain?
Let's trace the cascade step by step. It begins with hostile cognition, that chronic, simmering anger you mentioned earlier. This state keeps your HPA axis permanently activated.
Let's pause right there. For anyone who isn't a neuroendocrinologist, what is the HPA axis?
Fair question. It's your body's central stress response system, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. When it gets stuck in the on position, it floods your entire system with glucocorticoids, the most famous of which is cortisol.
Now, cortisol is fine if a tiger is actively chasing you, right? Like it gives you a burst of energy.
It is absolutely essential for short-term survival. But a chronic, never-ending flood of cortisol, that leads to something called glucocorticoid-induced oxidative stress, or GOS.
GOS, okay.
Think of your cell's mitochondria as tiny power plants. Under constant stress signaling from that cortisol, these little power plants are forced to run at like 200% capacity.
They're being overworked.
Massively overworked. so they become inefficient and they start leaking toxic metabolic waste. And this oxidative waste physically damages your cellular DNA, your lipids, and your proteins.
Wow. It's almost like the power plant is running so hot that the exhaust is literally melting the walls of the factory.
That is a very grounded way to look at it.
Yeah.
The cascade continues from there. Because you are ruminating, you are repetitively firing the exact same stressed neural circuits over and over again.
To spinning tires again.
Right. And this repetitive firing causes an accumulation of extracellular glutamate.
Now, glutamate is a neurotransmitter, right? But why is an accumulation of it bad?
Well, it's an excitatory neurotransmitter. It stimulates neurons, but too much of it causes excitotoxicity.
Cytotoxicity.
Yeah, the neurons are essentially being stimulated so relentlessly that they begin to physically break down. This massive buildup of glutamate acts as a trigger, causing a flood of calcium ions to rush into the postsynaptic neurons.
Wait, why calcium? We usually associate calcium with drinking milk for strong bones, not brain damage.
In the nervous system, calcium is actually a very tightly controlled signaling molecule. Just a tiny spark of calcium tells a cell to do something.
Okay.
But a massive flood of calcium, that acts like an internal panic button. And that panic button activates intracellular enzymes called calpains.
Oh man, the calpains were the part of the paper I will never forget.
I know, because they act like molecular scissors.
Scissors.
Literally.
Yeah.
When the calcium flood activates them, calpains literally start snipping apart the neuron's cytoskeleton. They sever the structural scaffolding that holds the brain cell together.
That is insane.
The energy of your hostility is being dissipated through literal, physical, cellular destruction.
That is just wild to think about. The negative thought loop summons molecular scissors to cut apart the very brain cells that are holding the thought.
It's self-cannibalizing.
Does this actually lead to permanent changes in the shape of the brain? Like, if we looked at a scan...
Absolutely. We see the aftermath very clearly in neuroimaging.
Yeah.
Two key areas are heavily impacted: the hippocampus, which you need for memory and learning, and the prefrontal cortex, which handles complex decision-making and emotional regulation.
The rational parts of the brain.
Yes, and under this constant biological disassembly, they undergo structural atrophy. They physically shrink. They lose their dendritic branches.
So the very parts of your brain that are responsible for calming you down and giving you perspective are being dismantled by the anger itself?
Exactly.
Yeah.
While at the exact same time, the amygdala, which is the brain's primitive threat detection center, it undergoes hypertrophy. It physically grows larger and becomes more sensitive.
Oh, no.
Your brain is actively hardwiring itself to be permanently stuck in a reactive, hostile state. The physical hardware is being reconfigured by the software of your mood.
Okay, I think we all need a collective deep breath after that, because the idea of our brains actively snipping their own synapses is so bleak.
It is heavy.
If hostility is this biological self-destruct sequence, is there like an undo button?
Fortunately, yes. The research points to a very clear biological antidote. It's a mechanism the paper calls the regenerative coherence pathway.
Okay, let's focus on that, please. Because it implies that being a good person or, cultivating gratitude isn't just a moral virtue. It sounds like a metabolic necessity if you want to keep your brain intact.
It really is.
How does benevolence actually fix the hardware?
Well, it all starts with the biology of safety. When you experience genuine benevolence or social connection or compassion, your brain activates the ventral vagal pathway.
Ventral vagal?
Right. This system applies a vagal brake on your heart rate. It slows things down and increases your heart rate variability, or HRV.
Ah, HRV. That's a metric that pops up on almost every fitness tracker these days. Like my watch measures it. Why is it so important in this specific context?
Because high HRV is basically the premier biomarker of metabolic efficiency. It indicates that your nervous system is flexible.
It can bounce back.
Yes. It can adapt to stress and recover quickly, efficiently managing its energy budget rather than blowing it all on a constant, rigid state of alarm.
So if hostility is an inefficient engine running hot and burning itself out, how does the body cool it down? I'm trying to picture how a feeling of gratitude actually changes my biology.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the body's infrastructure, it happens through what's called the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway.
That's a mouthful.
It is. But basically, when you experience benevolent signals, your nervous system releases acetylcholine. This neurotransmitter travels down the vagus nerve directly to the spleen, where it binds to immune cells called macrophages.
Wait, the spleen and immune cells, we've moved pretty far from the brain here.
We have, because the brain and the immune system are in constant two-way communication. When acetylcholine binds to those macrophages in the spleen, it sends a direct hardwired command to stop producing pro-inflammatory cytokines, specifically ones called TNF and IL-6.
Okay, what are TNF and IL-6 doing normally before they get shut down?
They are essentially the body's chemical alarm sirens. They trigger widespread inflammation, telling the body to swell up and prepare for damage.
Like when you twist an ankle, but system-wide.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
By shutting them down, the benevolent signal quite literally cools the systemic inflammation. It reduces the biological friction of just existing.
And I imagine that frees up a lot of energy.
An immense amount.
Mm.
Energy that was being totally wasted on false alarms is redirected back to the brain for repair and higher-order thinking. You mentioned earlier that hostility is catabolic. It breaks things down. Well, benevolence is anabolic. It builds things up.
Walk me through that building process. While hostility was busy summoning those calpain scissors, what is benevolence doing?
It deploys molecular safeguards. Take oxytocin, for example. We often call it the bonding hormone because it's released during social connection, like hugging or trusting someone.
Right.
But metabolically, it acts as a massive antioxidant booster. It enhances specific enzymes called SOD and GPX.
And what do those do?
Remember those overworked mitochondria leaking toxic oxidative waste from the stress?
Melting factory walls?
Yes. SOD and GPX act as the cleanup crew. They neutralize those toxic free radicals before they can damage your DNA.
So social connection literally dispatches enzymes to clean up the toxic waste left behind by stress.
It really does. And then the construction crew arrives in the form of BDNF.
Brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
You got it. Positive affect significantly upregulates BDNF. It is essentially miracle grow for the brain.
Miracle Bro, I love that.
It promotes neurogenesis, meaning the birth of actual new brain cells, and it enhances synaptic plasticity. It signals the entire system to invest its resources into building a more complex, resilient brain.
So what does this all mean for us, like, in our daily lives? We now know the exact physical mechanisms of how our thoughts dictate the structural integrity of our brains. How does this research change the way we approach mental health?
It changes everything.
Because there is a concept in the paper called Landauer's principle that I cannot stop thinking about. Does it explain why it's so incredibly hard to just let go of a bad thought?
Landauer's principle is probably the most profound implication of viewing the brain through the lens of thermodynamics. It is a principle from physics stating that erasing one single bit of information carries a physical metabolic cost.
Wait, it requires actual energy to delete data.
Yes, and doing so dissipates heat.
So when I want to stop ruminating and literally delete an angry thought from my mind, it requires physical calories.
Exactly. Now, picture a brain that is stuck in hostile cognition. It's processing massive amounts of chaotic, high-entropy noise. But because the person is under chronic stress, they're carrying a massive allostatic debt. Their energy budget is completely depleted.
They're exhausted.
The brain simply does not have the metabolic energy required to pay the caloric cost of erasing that noise.
Wow, so the bad thoughts get stuck on a loop because the brain is physically too exhausted to hit the delete button.
The paper calls this thermo-informational insolvency. The biological system is bankrupt. It is generating entropy faster than it can dissipate it.
And what happens when it goes bankrupt?
When any system reaches insolvency, it has to downsize. The brain sacrifices its most metabolically expensive hardware, the nuanced, complex architecture of the prefrontal cortex, just to keep the basic survival functions online.
The brain sacrifices its own intelligence because it cannot afford the energy bill of being chronically angry.
Exactly.
So where is the medical field going with this? The authors mentioned something called thermo-informational psychiatry.
It proposes a radical shift in clinical practice. The goal moves beyond just talking through symptoms. The goal becomes physically restoring the entropy dial of the mind.
How do you do that?
Practices like deep mindfulness, breath work, vagal tone training, they aren't just seen as soft relaxation techniques anymore. They're targeted biophysical interventions.
They're fixing the engine.
Yes. They are tools explicitly designed to recapitulate that endothermic energy storing cycle. They help the brain dissipate thermal waste and regain the energy needed to actually repair those synapses.
The paper also touches on something called frequency ethics, which feels incredibly relevant right now.
It really is. As we live more of our lives in digital environments that are dictated by algorithms, protecting our cognitive sovereignty is becoming a literal biological imperative.
Cognitive sovereignty.
Frequency ethics argues that human beings have a fundamental physical need to maintain low-entropy, coherent states. It is necessary for intelligence and health.
Because if an environment like a chaotic social media feed is constantly pushing us into high-entropy rage, it's not just annoying us, it is biologically dismantling our cognitive hardware.
The environment essentially acts as an informational neurotoxin.
Let me just try to summarize the sheer scale of what we've unpacked today because it completely changes how I view my own mind. Hostility, anger, cynicism, they are not just personality quirks.
Yeah, at all.
According to the laws of thermodynamics, hostility is a biophysical error. It is a highly inefficient exothermic reaction that quite literally consumes its own neural scaffolding to keep running. It shrinks your hippocampus, it breaks down your neurons, and it bankrupts your body's energy reserves.
And on the flip side, benevolence, gratitude, and compassion are not just passive ethical choices, they are the biophysical ideal.
The engine running perfectly.
Exactly. Benevolence is an active, regenerative biological program. It uses an endothermic cycle to preserve human intelligence, turn off systemic inflammation, and physically rebuild the structures of the mind.
Mind and body are not separate. They are a single continuous loop of energy and information. Coherence is life. Entropy is disassembly.
The research demonstrates quite literally that the penalty for chronic hostility is written in the atrophy of your synapses, while the biological reward for goodness is the continued existence and expansion of your mind.
I want to leave you in the final thought to ponder today, building on Landauer's principle and that idea of frequency ethics we just touched on. We just learned that erasing a piece of information costs actual physical metabolic energy.
Right.
If that is true, and if every single piece of anger-inducing high-entropy content you consume physically drains your energy budget and structurally degrades your synapses, how should you value your attention in the digital age?
It really forces us to reevaluate every screen we look at.
It really does. Think about the modern attention economy. Algorithms are specifically designed to keep us doom scrolling. Headlines are crafted to spark immediate outrage. Feeds are filled with endless conflict. Is it possible that the attention economy is actually an entropy economy?
That's a chilling thought.
Is it an economic model that quite literally profits off the biological disassembly of your brain? Because if your outrage makes a platform money, but the transaction costs you the physical structure of your prefrontal cortex, that is a price you simply cannot afford to pay.
It is a transaction that leads directly to thermo-informational insolvency.
What if being a chronic cynic isn't just a bad mood, but a self-destruct sequence melting your brain's physical structure? Well, now you know the exact physics of why that's true, and more importantly, you know the exact biology of how to hit the undo button. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious out there, and literally, for the structural integrity of your own neuron, stay kind.